So we're going to talk about Razor Pages in ASP.NET Core, something I'm super excited about. I said I would never say super excited when I joined Microsoft, but here I am 7 years later, and I just said super excited. Because I got to work on this over the past year and a half, and we are very happy with where it's turned out. We still have a lot of great ideas about how to make it better, but hopefully by the end of this, I can convince people in here who have already dismissed Razor Pages as a complete waste of time that maybe it's at least worth looking at. Okay, at least worth looking at. Everyone in here is an MVC developer, I'm assuming, all right? Okay, anyone here a web forms developer? Even if you used to be a web forms developer? It's me. Okay, good, no problem at all. So what is Razor Pages? So it's a new page-focused approach or mini framework, or not even that. It's a bunch of stuff in MVC in ASP.NET Core. It is not separate. It is part of ASP.NET Core MVC. It's the same view engine. It is part of Razor. All right? It's not, we have pages that's run by this view engine and views run by that view engine. It's all the same stuff. Like MVC is extremely malleable and configurable. All right? For those of you who have ever customized MVC, you will probably know that. And in ASP.NET Core, we have this new thing called application model in MVC, which lets you change lots of the conventions about MVC without you having to go and derive from the stuff in the box or replace it in DI. It's actually very nice. We use a lot of that capability to allow you to write stuff as pages. And then we added a few niceties on top of that that we think really fall out of building applications this way. It's designed and focused for people who are doing server-side HTML generation. So would you use this for your web APIs? Obviously not. Controllers and actions are a great paradigm for programming web APIs. Well, we think so. I mean, there are other ones that are very good too, but controllers and actions is where it's at. Or if you're returning anything that isn't HTML, you're not returning something that's going to be shown in a browser, stick it in an action and put it on a controller. That's perfect. But if you are returning HTML from your server that's going to go into a browser, I would thoroughly recommend that you look at Razor Pages. It is not meant to be a competitor to PHP. Right? It's not meant to be the new version of ASP.NET Web Pages, that horrible framework that we built 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Okay? Anyone use that thing? No? A couple of hands. No one's going to admit that one. That's even worse than web forms. Some good things came out of that, though. That's where Razor came from. Like Razor came from that effort. All right? So this is not that. We're not trying to show you or create a generation of developers or tell you not to use CSproj and tell you not to do dependency injection and all that type of, or not be able to write unit tests, right? All those things are encouraged and possible and first-class citizens on top of Razor Pages, all right? It's just MVC. And it's not just for simple scenarios. Don't think of this as like, oh, this will be great when I just have a very simple page that does blah. No, it's designed to handle all scenarios for when you're doing server-side HTML in general. Okay? If you're doing it with MVC and views today, you should be able to do it with Razor Pages, and it should be better. And if it's not, I want to hear the feedback. And if it's objective, not subjective, then we'll try and make some improvements to fix those issues. You can integrate it with controllers and views. So if you are migrating, or you have a large code base and you don't want to go and convert all your controllers, actions, and views over to Razor Pages, but you like Razor Pages, you can reuse the Razor parts, all right? So you can say, common layout file used by both my pages and my views, or common set of partials, and those are used by both my pages and my views, okay? It's just Razor. That's all it is. It's nothing particularly special, except that we've added some new stuff that's nice. And all the conventions that I'm going to show, there's a lot of conventions over configuration in here, but it's not conventions in spite of configuration or without configuration. You can change them all right? So what you'll see out of the box is what we decided we wanted things to be named and how we would find things and how we would dispatch and how we would invoke and what we would pass in. That's what we chose to do out of the box, but you can change it. You can customize it to your heart's content just as you can with MVC, all right? So don't get too hung up on some of the terminology I might use. If it doesn't sit well with you, you can change it, all right? You don't like what we default in certain places, you can change the defaults. I just want to reiterate, it is MVC. All this stuff that pre-existed before Razor Pages still exists, and you can still use it all in Razor Pages, okay? Routing is obviously still there. Pages create routes. You put a page file on disk, it results in a route, and it's built on the attribute routing system, the good one, not the crappy one, all right? Models are still there, obviously. Models are great. They allow us to separate our concerns, put things in nice, simple classes that we can pass around. That's what models are for. Action descriptors is really the heart of MVC. MVC doesn't care about the C, right? The actual framework doesn't really care that you have controllers. All it cares about is that there's a method that's an action that it can invoke, and that it's mapped to some incoming function, some incoming request, sorry, via routing. That's it. And everything else is just sugar on top of that, all right? So action descriptors come out of whether you're building controllers and actions or pages and handlers. It's the same thing. Everything gets dispatched via an action descriptor in MVC. That also means you get action results. What happens after you execute an action? You get a result, right? And that runs back through the other way of the MVC pipeline. Pages are exactly the same. You can return action results from pages if you so wish. Obviously, there are some new action results, ones that render the page, ones that redirect to pages, et cetera, et cetera. You can return the existing ones. If you really wanted to, you could return a view from a page. I don't know why you would, but you could. You could return JSON. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. I'm not going to judge you. You get filters, so you can do cross-cutting concerns. The normal filters that you'd expect work. There is a new filter, a page filter that you can apply that only runs on pages as well. You get model binding, of course. You get value providers to support model binding, of course. It's the same view context object that you've always used. There is a derived page context as well, but the view context is still there with all the same data that you've ever had. That also means you get the same temp data. You get support for tag helpers, which are obviously fantastic. If you don't like tag helpers for some weird reason, you can still use HTML helpers. They just work. Layouts and partials obviously still work. And anyone using view components from ASP.NET Core 1x? Anyone done that? Okay, a couple of hands. Not many people have used those yet, but they still work. All right. So if you factored out some logic into a view component, which is kind of like a mini controller that you invoke from views, you can call those as well from your pages. All right, and that's the end of my slides, I think. Is there any more slides? Oh, that's it. All right, let's just look at Razor pages then. So I have a project here that I created. I will say the Razor pages projects now are the default. All right, so if you weren't in my previous talk, I mentioned this briefly. If I go over here and do a file new, if you're in VS and I choose ASP.NET Core Web Application, and I'm choosing 2.0, this template is the Razor pages template. Okay? If you don't want to use Razor pages for your HTML, you would choose this one. It says Model View Controller. This gives you all the same UI and identity and all the same functionality, the 3 pages, that sort of stuff, as this one, but it's done using MVC, Model View Controller, instead of using Razor pages. Okay? So we feel that strongly about it that we want people to use it by default. So I've already done that over on this one here. Make sure it runs, because I probably changed it and broke it, because I usually do accidentally. Let's run that up. Oh, Facebook is like spamming me. All right, so there's my page. It looks very similar to what you would have seen in your template before. How do I add a new page? Well, what does the structure look like? I have a pages folder, again, by default. If you don't like it, you can change it. That's fine. We just decided that for good organization, like we do in most of our ASP.NET Core applications that we demonstrate and that we encourage people to do, we have a separate folder to put our stuff in. So we don't have a controllers folder with a views folder and a models folder to do basic HTML or just to get HTML at all. You just stick stuff in here. Why do I have a controllers folder as well? Well, because this application, because it has auth, has an endpoint that doesn't return HTML, as I mentioned. And so it has a controller with a logout link. So when you click logout, we sign you out, do some logging, and then we redirect you back to the home page. That's all. The only reason we have a controller is so we have an endpoint to do that. Okay? Everything else is in the pages folder. Well, how did I configure this in my app? It doesn't look any different. Where's MVC? There it is. Adding MVC adds Razor pages because Razor pages is part of MVC's normal view engine. If you add the Razor view engine, you get Razor pages. It's as simple as that. Okay? This method just adds the options. So if you want to configure something about Razor pages, you do it in this method here. Now, in this template, because we've got auth and identity and stuff set up, we're configuring some authorization requirements for certain aspects of the folder. So because everything in Razor pages is folder-based and file-based, because it's a page-based framework, everything becomes quite a lot simpler when it comes to organizing. So this is my pages root by default, and then inside here I have my Razor files. My index is going to default, so if I make a request to the root of this application, it's going to serve index.cshtml. Right? Straightforward. It's going to use layout CSHTML because that's been set up in ViewStart, and it's going to use view imports just like it would if you're using MVCs and views, and everything else is very, very standard and should be nothing new to people who have done Razor and views before. How do I add a new page? Well, that's pretty straightforward. I can add a new item. Let me add a new Razor page, which is here. We'll call it Demo Sydney. There is a bug in VS at the moment where when you add a new Razor page, I hope to get fixed very soon, the IntelliSense doesn't work. So you have to close and reopen it, which is a little annoying. And then inside here, it's just Razor, right? So I can say, hello from Sydney. Nothing is particularly new there. I can run this. We'll go back to the application. I can go now to Demo Sydney. Application is recompiling because I had touched one of the CS files. And I've got my Hello from Sydney page up and running, okay? Super, super, super simple. Now, obviously, we don't just put all of our logic or all of our stuff in a page inside here. We have other ways that we can do it. So you can see the model directive is being used up here to specify what we call a page model. So let me go and have a look at that. Demo Sydney model. And let me show you where that is on disk. So some of you eagle-eyed viewers may have already noticed the file name here, demosydney.cshtml.cs. So if I go over to the Solution Explorer again, under Demo Sydney, if I expand that, you can see I've got my demosydney.cshtml.cs. Now, it's just a naming convention, all right? Yes, default.aspx.cs is back. It's just a naming convention, all right? It's not derivation, right? It is not merging together with a code beside file like we had in ASP. And I'm using all the terms from web forms because I did that stuff for 15 years. It is not that. This is a page model that is attached to the page, okay? The page model, the page knows about the page model, okay? The page model doesn't have access to anything on the page, right? It's no different to a controller being able to return a view, but not being able to dive into it. It can just pass data into it, okay? And you use the model to talk back and forward. This is much more like an MVVM system. So who's ever used an MVVM framework? Like XAML or XAML, yeah, okay. Or even Angular or React, those type of systems, where your model, your view model, isn't just a POCO. It generally has functionality on it. You call methods on it. You bind from UI events to methods that are on your view model, okay? And it's live and interactive, but still separated. You can still test them, right? There's nothing wrong being able to test those things. What web forms got wrong was a lot of stuff, but primarily it really wasn't very testable because things weren't really separated well. You had a code behind, and the view part, the ASPX file, derived from the code behind, but that was kind of problematic, right? And then you often had this designer file that was hidden as well, and that kind of got merged into the code behind, and then the front end derived from that. And that made everything kind of a big ball of mess. Like we separated things in different files, but conceptually and architecturally, they weren't separate concerns, which made it very difficult to test. And then you didn't have dependency injection. The things that were on there, the properties weren't settable, right? You couldn't mock anything. So like it really wasn't set up in such a way to make it useful. All those things aren't true of this. Nothing derives from this. You get a page model class, you make your model on top of that, and then you attach the page to it. And then you put handlers on here that get executed when certain requests come in. So you can probably guess by the name of this handler when it's going to execute. So when a GET request comes in, this will happen. So let's pass some data from our page model back to our page. Well, how do we do that? Well, in a view and an MVC controller, what would you do? You would create a separate model class, generally, and you would new that up. You'd set some properties on it, then you'd pass that to the view result, right? Or you would do the abominable thing and you would put stuff in view data, and then you would just like hope it ends up on the other side and you'd pull it out by a string key, right? No one does that because it's horrible. We only do that when we have to pass data between views because there's really no other way to do it. But in here, we have a much better way. I can just add a property. So this is my message, all right? And then when get comes in, I can say message is equal to hello, Sydney. Hey, Sydney. And I can do whatever I want in there, obviously. And then rather than hello from Sydney now, I'll just say at model.message, all right? So if I go back to my app now and hit F5, I should see the exact same thing I saw before. It's just that now I'm setting this message from code rather than it being hard-coded in the view, right? And I really should prove that, shouldn't I? So I should probably come back here and say hello from, and I'll do something like this, and I'll prove that it's coming from here, name of demo Sydney model. All right, then we'll come back here, F5, wait for that to recompile, zoom it up a bit, and then we'll see it's actually coming from the model now. So already you should see that the separation that we're doing here still exists. Like the type of separation you're used to with views and controllers is still here. There's still a formal way to pass data from one side to the other. It's just that it's just easier, right? You just add a property and you code it as if it was an active view model, just like you would do in an MVVM system. Now this is one way I'm setting stuff from here onto this property, and then when the page runs, it can read stuff from here. All right, that makes sense because unlike an MVVM system where you have an active UI, this just lasts for the cycle of one request and gets sent down as HTML, right? But we also want to support binding stuff on the way in, obviously, right? So we'll look at doing some of that stuff as well. All right. So I already have a model type up here. In my data, I have a customer object, and inside here, it's pretty standard, first name, last name, email, phone number, blah, 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 birth date. I've got some data annotations on here. So let's build a fairly simple CRUD sort of view here, but we'll do it using Razor Pages instead of MVC. All right, actually, I might just tweak my, I'm going to freak out the AV guy because I just want to tweak my resolution. I think my monitor is running at 4K, and then it's trying to scale it down in the air. See, that's not good. Let's do this and just watch everything explode. That should be better. I'm hoping that this means that my VS, yeah, there you go. It's not quite as small as it was before. Good. Hopefully, I'll zoom in and out though so we can keep seeing. All right, so let's close my demo one. We don't care about that anymore. Let's go off and build some pages to edit customers. So I'm going to create a folder called customers. And I'll put a page in here. I'll make an index.cshtml. So what will the URL for that be? Any guesses? /customers, right? It's in the customers folder because this is file-based. When the route is constructed for this page, it's derived from go to the page root, which in my app is /pages because I didn't change it, and then look at the path from the page root to the file, customers/index. Okay, so then the URL is going to be customers/index, but because index is a default document, it's just /customers. Okay, simple as that. Now you can change routes as well, and we'll talk about that a little later. You can customize all this stuff. So let's say h1, call this customers. Okay, make sure that this is working before I go off and write a bunch of code. So /customers now in my application, and I should see a page that doesn't work because for some reason VS decided to kill IS Express. So we'll just hit Control F5 again. There we go. There we go. So now I've got my customers page showing up here. All right, so what do we want to do? We want to list out the customers that we have in this application. All right, so let's do that. I'm going to create a table, and then inside that table, I'll have a T head, and then inside that T head, I'm going to have a row, and inside that, I'll have a T head that does thing, and I'll do HTML.displayName for. And what am I going to do display name for? I don't have anything yet, so that's a problem. So let's go and add something to my model so that I can actually start doing things here. Well, I'm probably going to need some customers. So I'll say enumerable of customer. I have a customer class already, so that's good, and we'll call it customers. All right, very good. So now I have some shape. Oh, I keep hitting the wrong key there. All right, have some shape. Let's go back to here. So now I should be able to do customer display name for model. Where is it? M such that m dot customers. We'll just go into, we'll do the, well, yeah. What do people usually do? I always argue about this with people because I'm going to change that to a collection because indexing into this is just so much nicer than doing it this way. I'm just going to do it this way, right? First name, so do ID in here. Customers.1. Give me the first one, please. Where's my IntelliSense gone? First name. Oh, collection isn't an index, so I need to do IList. There we go. So I'm going to have that, and I'll just copy and paste this. We'll do first name, last name. And I think I had birth date or something. There we go. We'll do birth date. Very good. And then I have to add a body so I can actually go off and loop through these, which we'll do in just a moment. We'll add some cells in here. And then we'll do the normal thing that we would do here as well. HTML.display for. And we'll do m such that, well, I'm going to do a for loop now. So we'll do customer. We'll put our for loop in at for each var customer in model.customers. Oh, wrong one. Okay, and then we'll finish this one out. We'll just say display for m such that, because we don't really want to use m, but we'll do customer dot first name, and then we will copy and paste all of that. Okay, and we'll make this one last name, which should be this one up here as well, I've just noticed. And we'll do birth date. Okay. Now I don't have any data yet, so I don't think this is actually going to work particularly well. This obviously has to be in a row as well, which is why the editor is screaming at me right now. All right. That's probably the bare minimum I would have to do, right, to get something to work. Let's see what the page does. I don't have anything yet, so I'm just going to assume it's going to do nothing. And it throws a massive exception because I haven't set customers to a value, right? Null ref. So let's do that. Let's go and add a constructor. And we'll get an exception from the editor. That's awesome. Let's just not trust it and reopen it to make sure that's fine. And then I'll get my application DB context. I'll squirrel that away. Dependency injection just works the same way in a Razor page as it does in anything else in ASP.NET Core that's activated. Take it in via the constructor and then use it down here in your onGet. All right, so I'm going to have to set customers. I want to make this async because, that's what we should be doing these days. So async task, we'll call it onGet async. You don't have to. It doesn't matter if it has async on the end or not. It's just a convention. We just support both, right? If you don't like the word async on the end of your async methods, it's fine. We'll still call it. So we'll do customers. We'll just do toList async. We'll bring in EF to do that. So I will set customers equal to _db dot customers dot toList async. Let me bring in EF to make that work. Obviously, I have to await that. All right, so now I should at least have something on my customers object. So it won't throw, but I'm assuming it's not going to do anything because I haven't added any customers yet. So we'll go off and we'll add the ability to add customers next. Or we'll add some logic. So there's nothing there. I got a table. That's not particularly useful. It's not very pretty either. So let's just quickly tell Bootstrap that I really want that to be a data table. There we go. That's a bit better. And I'll add a condition up here. If model.customers.count is greater than 0, do that. Otherwise, we'll show something else. We'll do maybe a p tag. And no customers found. Try that. All right, so now it says no customers found. I don't particularly like having this much code. It's not a lot of code, right? But I don't particularly like having that much code. So I'm going to do what I would normally do in an MVVM system. And I'll do something like prop bool has customers. And then I'll make that a derived or a calculated property, which is customers.count is greater than 0. All right, and then I'll just change this to say if it has customers. All right, okay. And it should just keep working the same way. No customers found, so we're going to have to add the ability to create a customer. So we'll do that next. There we go. So let's add a button down here so we can create customers. So we'll do a button, and we'll say that has to go to a page called new, I guess. Doesn't exist yet. Create new customer. All right, and we'll give that a class so Bootstrap makes it look pretty. btn default. What does that look like? Okay, so now I can create a new customer, but the button doesn't do anything because I asked it to generate me a URL for a page that doesn't exist. All right, so URL generation in pages is routing. It's no different, absolutely no different. So I've said, please give me a URL for the page called new, which doesn't exist. So routing says, I don't know, I'll just give you a URL for the root of the application. So that's what it did. So let's go and create our new page. So back over to customers, we'll add a new item. Razor page, we'll call it new. So now I can build my new customer page. So let's go and open that up again. We'll add an H1 in here, create customer. Let's see if that's working. So I'm going to hit F5 to get the app to recompile. It'd be nice if that recompiled quicker. We're working on it. It is quicker than it was in 1X, but it still takes about, I don't know, 5 seconds. Create new customer. Still didn't go anywhere because I made it a button rather than a link. That was silly of me. Let's change that to an anchor tag. There we go. So now I'm off to my create customer page. So let's add the UI that we'll need to go ahead and create a customer. So let's do that. So I'm going to want a form. Method is going to be post. All right, so form tag helper now in ASP.NET Core 2 always runs. If you don't have any attributes on it telling it where to go, it just assumes that you're going back to where you are, because that's what you do when you're programming pages, all right? So there's just been little slight changes made to some of the tag helpers in the system based on some of the idiomatic sort of patterns that we found when building these types of applications. Rather than do this one from scratch, I might just copy this one from an existing one. So let me very quickly go and find that. So you don't have to watch me type out every single form field, because that's a little laborious. So over here, don't do that. Customers, new, let me grab that. Oh, this is nice. It has titles and all types of stuff. I'll pinch that. I'll pinch that bit at least. All right. Okay. So what I do, I added a link that takes me back to the customer list. So, ASP page back to index, that's fine. Then I've got some bootstrap stuff in there, and then a whole bunch of form stuff set up to edit the form. I've got no code behind yet, or no page model, sorry, so none of this stuff is lighting up. So let's go and add the properties that we'll need to the page model. So I navigate to that. Let me add a customer property. That's what we'll use to track the customer I'm actually working on. Not that. Customer. And this time, because I want the customer to be bound on post, I have to actually tell Razor Pages to bind this property when it's coming in. All right? So I decorate it with bind property. This is a new attribute in ASP.NET Core 2, and it works on pages and controllers. So if you want to have properties on your controllers or page models that get bound on post or post-like requests, you can decorate them with bind property and they'll automatically get bound, okay? Now you can also have stuff just come through in methods, just like you normally would. So I can do public void on post, okay? And I could take in here, if I wanted to, anything. I can take a customer, and customer will get bound as part of the post handler running, okay? But I'm gonna use just a property, because I need the property anyway in order to be able to call these tag helpers and have the whole runtime scaffolding system generate the right HTML for me. So I'm going to do that. Right, I don't really have to do anything on get in this page because this is a create page. There's nothing I have to look up. So let's do on post instead. This will likely be async again because they almost always are. So let's do that. And then let's look at the code that we have to do here. So again, this is all pretty bog standard. So EF stuff. So let's go and add or copy this. I'll just override the constructor name. All right, so there's my database. So what are we going to do? Well, first thing we'll do, we'll say if the not model state dot is valid. What would we do if the model state is not valid normally? Well, we'd probably re-render the view, right? So I'm just going to return page. Okay, that just renders the page that's associated with this page model. Okay. Now I haven't actually set a return type, so I'm going to have to do that. Well, it's the same one, a action result. Okay, nothing special. You're probably noticing that it's actually not a lot of work to move code from controllers and views into a Razor page and vice versa. All right, because all the primitives are basically the same. It's just the patterns and the conventions for method names and dispatching are more tailored to the type of files that you're putting them in. That's it. All the conventions, all the types are the same. All right, so then what would I do? I have a valid one. Well, then I'm probably going to want to go off and save it. So let's go await db.customers.add, and we'll add my new customer, which is the customer property. Good. I probably want to not that one, silly. That's save changes, isn't it? Then we'll save that, await db.saveChanges async. Now, if I was being really good, I'd probably put a try catch around this, and I'd handle db concurrency, blah, 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 update exception, all the rest of it, but this is a demo, so I'm not going to bother. So what I want to do after I've successfully changed it, though, is what? I don't want to render the page, because then I'm violating post redirect get, right? I want to redirect somewhere. So I could either just redirect back to this page, but that's kind of weird, because this is the create form. I probably want to redirect back to the list page. So let me return the result of a redirect to that page. So I'll say redirect to page, and I'll just say index. Now, for those who have been looking at these page names I've been passing in and wondering how this works, when we do URL generation for pages, we support relativity, okay? So this is a relative page referral. I didn't put a slash at the beginning, so it's going to look for an index page that's relative to the current page I'm on. And that's kind of important. We don't have anywhere else in MVC where this really makes sense. But it makes sense in pages because you have a folder with pages in it, right? You can just do that type of stuff because we can look at the file system or the metadata about the pages once they're compiled. If I were to put a slash in front of this would go to the root of the site and go to its index page. And if I did a dot slash, that would be the same as just omitting it completely because that's a relative one. You can also do dot dot, you can do traversal, all that type of stuff. Well, what's the advantage of that? It means that once I have a folder full of customer stuff, I can take that customer folder and move it anywhere else, and it'll continue to work in relation to itself, right? Because all the links are relative. That's kind of the advantage of doing HTML-focused page programming, right? Whereas if all this was in controllers, often when you make a routing change, you have to go and find all the references to that route throughout the site, and then, unless they're named routes, in which case you refer to them by name, but not many people I know go to the trouble of setting up named routes for every single endpoint in their app, so you have to go and refactor it. So this is just a nice little thing that we're able to do because we're working with page files. All right, so let's see if this worked. I should, I think, unless I missed something, now have the ability to create a customer. Let's have a look. All right, so I have a form. That's good. So let me create myself. All right. Now they are actually, let's see if validation works. Oh, yeah, validation's working. So I rendered the client-side validation. So everything so far is good. And then I'll hit save. Stuff seems to be happening, and it's saved. Great. So I have a record now in my database, which is awesome. But I kind of like to see a little bit more feedback when things happen. So I want to add a success message to this page when someone creates a new customer. So let's go ahead and do that. Well, how would I do that? Because I'm redirecting across pages, this gets a little complicated, right? Yes?
Sorry, quick question.
Yeah. Yes?
You were able to access customer without prefixing it?
Correct. That wasn't a Razor Pages thing. So the question is here, specifically, right? This is a feature of the tag helper system, which has been there for ASP.NET Core since version 1. This property on the tag helper, ASP4, is of type model expression. And model expression is a very special tag helper type that is built for tag helpers that says, I want the value of this HTML attribute to point to something on the model. Right? So when we code gen this, we kind of prefix this with model for you. And the editor knows that. So when we built the tooling, we do that for you as well. And of course, the advantage of that is, because we have IntelliSense, is I can come in here and hit Control-J, and the only IntelliSense I get is the stuff on my model, which is really nice. Okay? All right. So let's go and add feedback. Now, it can get a little complicated, right? Because I'm actually redirecting. So if I want to set a message here that's going to show on this page, well, how do I do that? How do I pass that from this page through the redirect to the browser and back to the server again? What would people usually do? So I think in the templates, we used to have an enum that was defined somewhere in the app with the different messages, and then we'd pass the enum index through the query string, and then we would use the query string to bind to the enum to check the message, and then we would render that message, which sucks. And then the problem with that would be that if you hit F5 in the browser after the first one, the query string stays there, so you just see the message every single time, which is not really what you want. You could try and store it in session. Ew, that's not very nice. You could use temp data, but that requires session, so that's not very much nicer either. You could put in a cookie, but then you'd really have to worry about securing it, making sure that the cookie value was signed by you, so you don't open a vector where someone can put a message in a cookie and then have it go to your server, and then you show it, right? You don't want to do that. You don't want to allow unvalidated content. So we built a feature to make this really, really, really easy. So all I have to do is add a property, string, message. Okay, I'll set that property. Where I want it to be set, where it's logical to set it. I just perform the operation, customer created successfully. So I have all the state about the operation. If I wanted to put in the ID or the name or anything, I could do all that here because I have all the state, right? I'm writing that method, all right? Then all I need to do is go over to my index, create a matching property with the same name, string, message, and I just have to decorate them both with an attribute that tells Razor Pages where you want that property's backing value to be stored. And incidentally, this works in controllers now as well. Right? So every time we found something as part of doing this that we felt was a good pattern for doing HTML-based stuff, we said, well, let's add it to Razor Pages, and then we'll figure out whether it makes sense in MVC as well. And if it does, we added it there as well. Okay? So now all I have to do is set this property and read it on any page model or controller where it has that name, and it will always be backed by the same backing field. So for those who don't know, temp data works like this. When you set the value of a temp data with a given key, it stays valid for the current user no matter how many requests they make until you read it again. And then when you read it, we delete it. All right, does that make sense? So it's not just one request, it's as many requests until it's read again using the same key. All right? Now, before, temp data had to be set up using session. And setting up session was always a pain because you had to have Redis or you had to have in-memory session or something like that. We changed the default temp data provider in 2.0 to use cookies. So we encrypt the cookie, then we sign the cookie with all your temp data in it. It goes down to the client, goes back to the server. As soon as you've read it, we delete the cookie. So it only lasts as long as your temp data value lasts. Okay? So now, I have to display it, I guess. I'm not actually displaying it anywhere, am I? Let me cheat. I know I have a nice little sort of alert thing somewhere. Or I could just cheat from taking the other one, I guess, couldn't I? If I go over to edit, oh, I think I have it on this one. There we go. This is what I want. Perfect. I'm going to add a little bit of logic to the top of my index page now. And I'm going to add a helper property that calculates whether I should show the message or not. And you can probably figure out how that's going to work. It'll be a bool. It'll say show message. And that will be set to true based on whether the string has a value. Okay? Now again, anyone who's ever built MVVM style systems, XAML, any of those, this is pretty common. Like your model has a whole bunch of helper properties that are read-only that your view just kind of like asks bools, strings, dates, I don't really care, I don't want a lot of logic, just tell me what to do. So you put all this logic in your model so you can test it. It's really, really easy to test it when it's here, right? And it keeps all the logic in one place, which I really, really like. All right, so now I have enough that hopefully if I do this again, I'll get a nice little message. So let's do that. Let's just hit F5 to force the app to recompile. Then I will go ahead and I will create my second customer. And I saw Jordan before, so I will create a customer called Jordan Knight. And look at that. Now I get customer created successfully at the top of the page. All I didn't have to worry about where the data was going. I didn't have to pass off the query string. Set a property here, read the property there, back them both with temp data, and it all just works. Okay? Really, really, really nice. If I hit F5, or I show you by clicking it, it goes away because the temp data is now gone. Okay? Now, if you want to see all that happening under the covers, you can obviously use the network tab, hit preserve log, go over to create customer, create another one. So let me turn that on. Let me clear this out. We can do like Joe Blow, come down here and hit save. And then down in here, what you'll see is when I do the new, when that header comes back, we're setting this cookie. There it is, MVC core cookie temp data provider, which includes a large crypto string, which, trust me, includes the message that I just wrote. And then I get a redirect, right, to 302. So then I get a redirect, and then I get a get back to the customers page, or /customers, which is my index. That request sent up that cookie. So let me find the request header. There it is. So I've got an anti-forgery cookie. And then all the way over here somewhere, there will be my temp data cookie. There it is. So I sent up the temp data cookie. Awesome. But then in the response headers for that same request, you'll see we're clearing that cookie. Okay, set cookie temp data provider. And that expired at the beginning of the JavaScript epoch, which was in 1970. All right? So that's how it is that we get this very simple way of passing simple data. Don't put complex objects in here, please. Just put strings and bools and dates and things like that in there. Between pages or controllers, very, very, very simply. So that's really, really nice, including across redirects. Right, so let's add the ability to delete. All right, we've got create, but we need to be able to purge. So let's do that. Let me go and add a button. So I'll add an extra column in the head here, and I'll put a non-breaking space in it because I'm old school. I don't trust browsers to render the right thing. So I'll put a thing in here, and we'll put a button in here. And we'll make that button say delete. And I'll give that button some class. And we'll say btn, extra small. And we'll do btn danger, because I'm going to delete when I click on it. And we want that button to go somewhere that will do the delete, right? Well, I don't have a form yet, so I'd best wrap the whole thing in a form now. So let's do method equals post. And we'll stick that underneath here. Okay. Do I dare invoke formatting? No, don't trust formatting in a Razor document. That's not a good idea. I get Mads Christensen, he told me that they're rewriting all the formatting for the HTML editor in the next version, which I was very happy about, to make it less smart. And that will basically mean it always does the right thing. It won't try and figure out, we just say, nope, I'll just indent every time I see something new, I'll just indent. Simple, simple, simple. So I'm hoping that's going to solve all of our Razor formatting woes that we've been dealing with for the last, I don't know, 8 years since we built the Razor editor. All right, so I've got a delete button now, but it doesn't go anywhere. So let's say I want this delete button to go, well, where? Well, I don't really want a separate delete page. I'm not going to build like a delete confirmation. I'm just going to assume that you do know what you're doing when you hit delete. So I just kind of want to stay on this page. You hit delete, it deletes it, it shows a message, okay? And I don't want to have to put it in a separate controller or a separate page. I just want it to be on a different method on this page. So I'm going to specify a custom handler. So we'll do ASP page handler, and we'll say, I want this, when clicked, to run the delete handler. Well, how does that work? Well, I'm in a form, which I didn't specify an action for, so the action has already been set to this page. But then when I set page handler on the button, this renders out using form action, all right, which is an HTML5 attribute that lets buttons inside forms change the action of the form when you click them. So you can have multiple buttons that go to different endpoints inside a single form rather than having to have a separate form for every single button. You know, it's nice. So we do that for you as part of this. Incidentally, if I set that to ASP-controller, it does the same thing, all right? It'll just render form action so that you can go off to a different place without having to have a separate form. So let's add that handler so it actually does something. So I'm going to add a handler, public async task on post delete async. So how does that work? Well, it's still on. It's still post because it's handling the post verb, but now I've added a suffix, which is the handler name. Okay, delete. Delete is my handler. So this one will happen when I do a delete. Now I want to pass in the ID of the thing to delete, right? So I'll do ID, and I better make sure I actually pass that in here. Well, how do I do that? I do it via routing. That's how you pass stuff around in links. So I'll do route ID, and this will have to be customer.id. All right, so now when the URL is built that sets the form action, it'll take into consideration the handler, and it will take into consideration all the route data I've passed it, and I should get a lovely long link that eventually ends up in it posting to this one here with some data. So let's go ahead and delete it. What's the easiest way to delete using EF? I usually do the hacky way. So I do ef.customers.attach, and then I do a new customer, and I set its ID to ID, and I do it in, I do that, and then I set its state equal to the deleted state, right? So you can do this multiple ways, right? You could read it from the database first, see if it's there, and if it's there, mark it as checked, but I don't want to do 2 database reads. I'm just going to tell it, delete this thing, right? Simple. Then I'll await the changes, save changes async. I'm assuming that's always going to work. And then I will go ahead and redirect. Again, I don't want to just render the page. I've performed a post. I need to make sure I redirect back to the page, right? So redirect, return to, redirect to page. And if you just pass redirect to page, no arguments, it'll assume you want to go to the current page. Super straightforward, okay? Lastly, helps if you actually return an iAction result. I want to set a message. So I'll say message is equal to customer deleted successfully. And this is the same message field that I added to support the message coming from the other page, but I'm just using it to support the message from itself. Okay? It's just a property. All it is in this code is just a string property that you set, and then the framework is taking care of actually populating it and traversing it across pages and redirects and all that type of stuff. All right, so let's see if this works. Recompiling, recompiling, recompiling. Hopefully now I'm going to get a delete link. Good, all right. Well, I might actually debug this one. Let's put a breakpoint here. It's attached to .NET. Very good. We'll come over here, hit delete. Good, all right, so it hit, excellent. There's my ID, 7002. Go ahead and delete that. Good, set my thing, redirect, come back to the browser, and it's gone, and the customer has been deleted successfully. Marvelous, very, very nice. I think very straightforward, and quite a few less files in order to achieve the same thing as in MVC with all the same levels of separation. Now, what URL got posted to there? We didn't see it, right, because it happened super, super quick. So if I delete Jordan, it's just gone. Like I don't really get to see the URL. So we have to go down into here and have a look at what happened. So I got the customers. Well, I didn't hit preserve cat log, so that's not going to do much. Let's delete myself. I'll clear this out. Oh, Joe Blow. I already deleted myself. Hit delete. There we go. So I went to this URL here. My mouse keeps falling down. So ID equals blah and handler equals delete. All right, because we didn't tell routing where to put ID, and we didn't tell it where to put handler, right? There's no route declaration for this page. It's just a page name. And so all it could do was add them as query strings. That's what routing always does. If you say to routing, here's the route I want you to use, and here's the route data I want you to use to construct the URL, if there's no matching tokens, it just shoves it all on the end of the query string, right? That's how it's always worked. If you want to change this, though, because you don't like the fact I'm passing all this as the query string, it's really, really, really easy. So let's do that. Let's change the URL. Come back to my index page. Come back up to my page declaration. And what you can do up here is you can specify extra route segments to add after the page route. You can't change the actual page route declaratively yet. We're going to add that in 2.1. All right? In 2.0, it comes from the file name. And if you want to change it, you have to do it in code. All right? And I'll do that in a minute. But you can augment this. So I can say, I want this to be ID question mark, because that's going to be optional. And then I want it to be handler question mark, because I want that to be optional as well. All right? So what does optional mean? It means that more than one route is basically getting generated for this page. All right? Obviously, I'm going to match just index, and then we have a second one, which is the default one, which removes it. And then I'm specifying an additional one, which is index, and then ID and handler. If I didn't have the question marks there, index wouldn't match anymore, right? Because I would be telling routing that it needs to have an ID and it needs to have a handler. All right? Now, this is just attribute routing, so you can do all the standard things. I can put a route constraint on here. Right? I could say it has to be an int, and I could reorder these. If you prefer to have the handler name first and then have the ID, delete this one, then you could do that. Right? So now, without doing anything else, that should be enough to change this application. So let's add a new customer. I'll add myself back. Hit enter. Right? So I've got my new customer. Let me clear the log and delete. So this time, you can see now that I've gone to customers, ID, and then delete. All right? The whole thing just continued to work. That's the advantage of routing. That's why we built it all those years ago. I didn't have to change any other code. All I did was state that I wanted the route to be different, and then everything else just continued to work. Right? Super, super, super nice. Yeah? So the question was, what if I want to change the method for the form, or for what? In the link? Well, you can't change a method via a link, right? Oh, you want to do a different HTTP method. I'm sorry. So you want to handle something other than delete, other than post. Right. So yes, you can do that. You can't really make HTML forms do anything other than get and post, because HTML doesn't support that. But if you have like JavaScript on this page and you want to make a put request or a delete request, then all you would do is say on delete async, and we will just map that. So we don't get too opinionated out of the box. The default convention is look for methods that start with on, then look at the current HTTP verb and look for that here. And then if there is a handler specified, look for that after that. And then optionally look for async. And that's it. And if you don't like that convention, you can change it. And there's already a blog post from a dude in the community who said, I don't like all this. I just want verbs. And he made it look like Web API 2. So he just has post, get, put, blah, 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 blah. And he just does it that way, and it just works just fine. So 2 lines of code. Right? Very, very simple to change. All right. So now, how functional have we gotten here? We've got to the ability to create a customer. I'll create myself again. That's deja vu. Right? I can delete. I can't edit. But you can imagine what edit looks like. I'm not going to waste your time doing edit. I have edit over here in this one. And it looks pretty much the same. Right? So it's just the same form as create, except it says edit. And then the edit code behind looks exactly like you'd expect. I bind the customer. I have my message like I had before. When I do a get, I have to do on get now, right? Because I have to look up the customer that I'm going to edit. So I take in the ID. I find them. If it's null, I set a message that says, hey, I couldn't find you. And then I redirect you back to the index. Otherwise, I return the actual page so you can edit the customer. And then after that, on post, when you've hit save changes, it looks like you'd always see, right? Check the model state. If it's invalid, return the page so you can see the errors. Update the entity framework type. Go ahead and call save. Say it was updated successfully. Look, I actually add a DB update concurrency exception here. And when it's finished, just redirect to the page. All right, super, super, super simple. Well, what if you want to change? I said that you could change this URL, but that you couldn't do it declaratively. So how would you do that? Well, you can do that in code. So let's go and do that. I think this is the app I was doing. Yep. So if I go over to my startup, boop, 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 and I go down to here in my Razor Pages options, I can change the root directory. As I said, by default, it looks in Pages. If you don't like the fact that there's a Pages folder, you can just set that to nothing, and then we'll just look for Razor Pages in the root of the app, all right? Some people like that, but we decided to make it that one by default. So I can say conventions, add page route, all right? So I can add a page route. Note it's not set page route. You're still just adding extra routes on top of the page. You're not changing the root route of the page. You're kind of adding an additional one. So I can add a page route. The first thing it wants is the page name. So this is page root relative. So I want to go, let's change customers/index, that page, to also, or let's add a route, not change it, so that it responds to all customers. Let me zoom out a bit, all right? So now if I go to all customers at the root of the app, I want it to render customers/index. Let's see if that works. So I'll just F5, because I changed C#, I have to recompile. Recompiling. So customers will still work, because I didn't change it, I simply added one, all right? But now I can say all customers, and that works as well. Now, I have multiple routes now for that customers page, right? So what happens when I ask it to generate? Well, this link here is generating, right? Back to customer list. I asked it, please give me the link to customers/index. And what did it do? If I click on that, it's now using my custom one, right? So when you add custom page routes, they basically go to the top of the list. So that if you ask for generation, it's always going to use that one at the top, okay? Yeah?
Do you always have to include like /index? So if you go /customers/index, can you just go /customers/?
Well, you absolutely can. So the question was around, if it's named index, do you have to include the index? So you don't. So if I just go /customers, oh, you mean when you're referring to pages? Yes. So the convention around making it the default is for navigation. It's like when the URL comes in. When you refer to the page, you're basically pointing to the file from the page root. All right? Now, we don't include the extension because we know it's CSS/HTML, but you have to point us to. It's like when you do views and you say, find me this view, right? There's kind of a search hierarchy that goes on. All right, coolio. What else? Oh, let's go to page filter. So I said you could run filters. If you already have resource filters or auth filters, they work with pages, right? They'll just work. You don't have to do anything. They will run when the action result comes back from the page. It's a resource. All your filters will run. You can authorize these with attributes if you want. You'll note I've got code here to authorize a folder, the account managed folder, because you can't get into that unless you're signed in, and then to authorize a specific page, which is log out. Now, in 2.0, the only way to mark a folder as authorized is in code, because there's no attribute way to put stuff on a folder. Like, where would you put it, right? It goes on a class. You can't put it on a folder, so you have to write code to do that. But when you're authorizing a page, you can, if you want to, use attributes. And I mean, why wouldn't you? It's kind of nice. So I could say that customer delete, that action, or I could say customer new is authorized. I could go to its model, and I could come up here, and I could just decorate it with authorize, just like you would do anywhere else. And now that particular page will require authorization, right? Because all that does, it's a marker that the authorized filter that is in the pipeline looks for, right? That's all it is. It's very straightforward. If we want to do a new one, though, let's build a new one. Now, incidentally, we are going to add a feature in 2.1, I hope, that will let you do this declaratively for folders. So what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to go down to the view imports and do something like this. Add attribute authorize. And you, if I can type it, authorize, and you could put policy in here or just do something like that, all right? And then that would add the authorize attribute to every page that view imports applies to. All right, so if you put the view imports, a different one inside customers, then it would only apply to that folder, right? So you get that whole hierarchy thing that you get with view imports and Razor, which is kind of nice. By the way, this is new. And it works in Razor views as well as Razor pages. The @namespace directive will change the namespace of the C# classes that are generated from the Razor files. And it honors the folders that the files are in, the Razor files, okay? And so this way, your derived or your generated class names that come from your Razor files can very easily end up in the same namespaces as the C# files that are next to them. That's not true today. I don't know if anyone's run into that, where they try and put a C# file in the same folder as a view, and they wonder why they can't see each other. It's because all views by default get put in a fixed namespace. It's like ASP.NET Core.views or something. Like you can't change it. You can now, all right? So that makes it very, very easy to find stuff, which is kind of nice. All right, let's add a filter. Don't make my app not compile. There we go. I'll add a folder and call it filters. Inside here, I will add a class, and we'll call it logging page filter. And I will say iPage filter. And I will implement that. And so basically, it looks like any other filter that you've ever looked at. It has stages depending on what the filter is targeting. Page filters target pages. So when the page handler is selected, you get a context that lets you change stuff. You can either log it out, you can override it, you can tell it to execute a different handler if you want. It's up to you. When it's executing, you get one. And then when it's executed, you get the outcoming action result, and you can modify it the way you normally would. Okay? Who's ever written a filter for MVC? Okay, it's exactly the same thing. All right. So use it. You just add it to the MVC filters collection with all the other filters. Like it's not different. Just throw it in there, and it'll work. All right. I'm not going to bore you with that. It does just work. I can show you the code in the other one. If I go to the startup. All right. So here's my filters. Here's my page filter that I wrote. I've added it to my MVC options filters collection, and then that page filter will run for every single page that I have.
Does it have async?
Yes, the page filter does have async support. So I think you can do an iAsync page filter. Yeah. If you do an iAsync page filter, then you get task-based methods instead of none. All right. As I said, you can change the convention. So if anything in there offended you only because you didn't like the fact that I called it a handler, or you didn't like the names of the methods, but you kind of like the overall thing, you can just change it. So Pranav, who is one of the developers on Razor Pages, he has a GitHub repo at pranavkm, customizable page handlers, and he has an example there of using the page conventions type to basically change a whole bunch of stuff around how stuff is found. There's also a bunch of good community blog posts about how to do this as well. There's at least 2 I know of, and if you watch the ASP.NET community stand-up, everyone watch that? ASP.NET community stand-up? If you don't, you should. It's great. We featured a whole bunch of those links in the last couple of weeks. So you can go to live ASP.NET. If you've never seen this before, do a plug, live ASP.NET. We do a mostly weekly show that goes for roughly half an hour to an hour every week. Hanselman, John Galloway, and myself. And if I'm not there, then we have other people come on. And we showcase community links. We talk about the content. I give an update on what we're doing that week in the team. And then we answer questions in YouTube chat from people as well. So if you're interested in that, the whole archive of, we've been doing about 2 years now. The whole archive of stuff is there, and you can see the next episode. They had one today when I wasn't there, I think, and they're going to do one next week, which I won't be there either because I'm on holiday next week. So, all right, some things for vNext that are coming. We want to add more conventions in box. Usually the most visceral feedback we get is like, Razor Pages looks great, but I hate all these defaults. I want to change it to do this, 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 and this. And so if we get enough of that feedback where there are like factions of people that want certain conventions, then we might just put some more conventions in the box so you can just easily change them. Right? So yeah, we'll have a default one, but here's some other ones that you can have in the box. We want to add support for page model properties and page handler parameter validation. So what I didn't say is that when you have a page model property like customer, you can't put validation attributes directly on the property there. So you can't have like string message, have an input bound to that, and then have a required field on message on your page model. And it's the same reason why you can't do it on parameters in action methods. Right? You can't have like take in string message in an action method and then put required in the action method. It doesn't work. It's never worked. We're going to make that work in 2.1, all right? Because people keep asking for it. We're finally going to do it. I talked about add attribute. And I talked about adding support for attribute routing on pages, which would allow you to then use that attribute to change the route of the page directly on the page model or inside the Razor file, which would be nice. So you don't have to do it in C#. That's it. Please go off and try it out. Give us your feedback over on the MVC repo, because it's just part of MVC, so we can make improvements to this in 2.1, which will be coming at some point in the future. But please go off and try this now as part of 2.0. It is now in RTM and ready for all of you to give it a go. So I'm done. Thank you very much.